The strange thing about saving a life is that sometimes you never learn whose heartbeat you carried home with you. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed softly as I rolled down my sleeve and pressed a cotton pad against the inside of my arm. The blood donation center was almost empty now. At 2:17 in the morning, most people in Baltimore were asleep, wrapped in warm blankets and dreaming about tomorrow. I was sitting in a plastic chair with a paper cup of orange juice in my hand, trying to convince my exhausted body to make it through another day. My name is Naomi Carter, and for the past 11 months, I had donated blood every single month without missing an appointment. Most people thought it was unusual. Some thought I was too generous. The truth was much simpler. When I was 16 years old, my mother died waiting for a transfusion that arrived too late. Ever since then, I made myself a promise. If someone out there needed blood and I could help, I would. No questions asked. The nurse smiled as she collected my paperwork. "Same time next month?" she asked. I nodded. "Same time next month." My legs felt heavy as I stood. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the medical testing lab across town, and every muscle in my body ached. All I wanted was my apartment, my couch, and 6 uninterrupted hours of sleep. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The parking lot glistened beneath the streetlights like polished glass. I grabbed my jacket and headed toward the exit. Then my phone rang. I almost ignored it. Almost. The screen displayed an unfamiliar hospital number. Something in my stomach tightened. "Hello," I answered. A woman's voice came through immediately. Fast. Breathless. "Miss Carter? This is Mercy General Hospital. We apologize for calling so late." I stopped walking. What happened? There was a brief pause. I could hear distant voices and the faint beeping of medical equipment behind her. "We have a pediatric emergency," she said. "A 7-year-old boy. Extremely rare blood type. We checked the regional registry, and your recent donation is a perfect match." My grip tightened around the phone. "Is he going to be okay?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We're doing everything we can." I closed my eyes. I had never met this child. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he looked like. Somewhere in the city, there was simply a little boy fighting for tomorrow, and somehow my blood might help him get there. I opened my eyes and turned away from the parking lot. Away from home. Away from sleep. "Tell me where to go," I said. What I didn't know was that this one decision would place me directly in the path of the most powerful man I would ever meet. And neither of us would ever be the same again. I arrived at Mercy General 23 minutes later with rainwater dripping from the edge of my jacket and exhaustion weighing down every step. The night lobby felt strangely quiet, the polished floors reflecting the soft glow of overhead lights. A nurse was already waiting for me near the reception desk. "Miss Carter?" she asked. I nodded. Relief flashed across her face so quickly that it made my stomach tighten. She thanked me 3 times before we even reached the elevator. That was when I realized how serious this situation really was. As the elevator climbed, she explained only the basics. The patient was 7 years old. His condition was rare. His body depended on regular transfusions, while specialists searched for a long-term solution. Privacy restrictions prevented her from sharing much more. Normally that would have been the end of the conversation, but something about her expression told me there was more she was not saying. The elevator doors opened onto a private pediatric floor unlike any hospital wing I had ever seen. The walls were elegant. The lighting was warm. Fresh flowers sat on tables that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Yet none of that was what caught my attention. It was the men. 3 of them stood near the nurse's station wearing dark suits. Another stood beside a hallway window overlooking the city. They were calm, silent, and watchful. Not hospital security. Something else. The atmosphere felt less like a medical floor and more like a place protecting someone important. I followed the nurse down the corridor. The sound of my shoes echoed softly against the polished floor. As we approached a room at the end of the hall, I noticed a small paper crane hanging from the door handle. The nurse paused before entering. "He likes those," she said quietly. "He folds them when he is feeling strong enough." Something about that detail broke my heart. Inside, the room was dim except for a bedside lamp casting a gentle golden glow. Machines hummed softly. Monitors blinked steadily. And there he was. A small boy resting against white pillows. Dark hair. Pale skin. Tiny shoulders that looked too fragile beneath the hospital blanket. He could not have been more than 7 years old. A paper crane rested beside his hand. For a moment I simply stood there. He looked so ordinary. Not a symbol. Not a patient number. Just a child. The nurse adjusted his blanket. "His name is Ethan," she whispered. Ethan. The name settled into my mind immediately. His eyes opened slowly. Green. Bright despite his exhaustion. They drifted toward me. "Are you the lady?" he asked softly. His voice was barely louder than a whisper. "What lady?" I asked with a smile. "The one who came when they called." I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. "Yes," I said. "I guess I am." Ethan studied me for several seconds before offering the smallest smile. "Thank you for coming." Nobody had ever said those 4 words quite like that before. Then the room door opened behind me. The temperature seemed to change instantly. The nurse straightened. The atmosphere shifted. And when I turned around, every person in the room suddenly looked toward the same man standing in the doorway. The man standing in the doorway did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The entire room seemed to adjust itself around his presence. He was tall, dressed in a dark tailored coat that still carried tiny drops of rain across the shoulders. His black hair was neatly combed back, and his expression was calm enough to be unreadable. Yet every nurse, every staff member, even the men waiting outside the room, seemed aware of him the second he appeared. His eyes moved immediately to Ethan. Only Ethan. The sharpness in his face softened almost imperceptibly. He crossed the room in silence and rested a hand gently on the edge of the hospital bed. "How are you feeling tonight?" he asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Better." The man nodded once, as if that single word mattered more than anything else in the world. Then his gaze shifted toward me. I suddenly became aware of my wrinkled jacket, my tired eyes, and the fact that I had been awake for nearly 20 hours. For several seconds neither of us spoke. "You came," he finally said. His voice was low and controlled. "They said a child needed help," I answered. "So I came." Something unreadable flickered across his expression. Gratitude, perhaps. Or surprise. Before he could respond, Ethan tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Dad," he said quietly. "This is Naomi." "Dad." The word landed with unexpected weight. I looked back at the man. Suddenly the expensive private floor, the security, and the atmosphere all made sense. This was Ethan's father. The man offered his hand. Adrian Sato. His grip was firm but respectful. "Thank you for helping my son." I smiled awkwardly. "I did not really do anything special." "You did," he said immediately. "More than you know." The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. I glanced toward Ethan, who was already fighting sleep again. The paper crane beside him had slipped onto the blanket. I picked it up carefully and placed it back on the table. Ethan watched me. "I made that one yesterday," he whispered proudly. "It is good," I said. "You must have practiced a lot." His smile grew wider. For a moment he looked like any other 7-year-old boy. Not a patient. Not someone connected to wealth or influence. Just a child trying to stay hopeful. The nurse checked his monitor and adjusted a blanket corner. The room settled into a peaceful silence. Then Adrian spoke again. "Would you walk with me for a moment?" The request was polite, but something in his tone suggested it was important. I followed him into the hallway. The doors closed softly behind us. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows overlooking Baltimore. For several seconds he simply stood there looking out across the skyline. Finally he turned toward me. "There is something you deserve to know," he said. "The blood you donated tonight was not the first donation that helped Ethan." A strange feeling settled in my chest. "What do you mean?" Adrian looked directly into my eyes. "For almost a year, every successful transfusion my son has received has come from the same donor." My heartbeat slowed. Somehow I already knew what he was about to say next. For a moment I thought he had made a mistake. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, quieter. Beyond the glass, Baltimore shimmered beneath the rain, but all I could focus on was Adrian standing in front of me. "That is impossible," I said softly. "The hospital never tells donors where their blood goes." Normally they do not, Adrian replied. But Ethan's medical team tracks every compatible donation because his condition is so rare. He paused. Your donor identification number appeared again and again. I stared at him. 11 months. 11 separate appointments. 11 times I had sat in a chair, rolled up my sleeve, and gone back to work afterward without thinking much about it. You are saying? My voice trailed off. Adrian nodded. You have been helping him survive for almost a year. I looked through the small window in Ethan's room. He had already fallen asleep. One hand rested beside the paper crane. He looked peaceful for the first time since I had arrived. A strange ache formed in my chest. Not sadness. Not happiness. Something deeper than both. I never knew, I whispered. I know. Adrian's voice softened. That is why I wanted you to know now. We stood there in silence for several seconds. Then he reached into his coat pocket and removed a small envelope. What is that? I asked. A gesture of appreciation. I did not even touch it. No. His eyebrow lifted slightly. No. I did not come here for money. The answer came faster than I expected. I donated because somebody needed help. He looked genuinely surprised. Most people would at least open the envelope. Most people are probably smarter than me. The corner of Ethan's father's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You have no idea what your kindness has done for my son. Then tell me about him. The question seemed to catch him off guard. Could see him preparing to discuss financial arrangements or hospital resources. Instead, I had asked about Ethan. For the first time since we met, his expression changed completely. The powerful businessman disappeared. In his place stood a father. He loves astronomy, Adrian said quietly. He can name every planet and every moon in the solar system. I smiled. That explains the paper cranes? Those came from his mother. The warmth in his voice faded into something reflective. She taught him how to fold them. I noticed the way he looked toward Ethan's room when he spoke. Like every decision he made began and ended there. He seems like a good kid, I said. He is. Adrian glanced back at me. And tonight he was asking whether the donor would come. I blinked. He knew someone was coming? He hoped. The answer hit me harder than I expected. Somewhere during the past year, Ethan had been waiting for a stranger he had never met. A stranger whose name he never knew. The realization settled heavily in my heart. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. 3 missed calls from work. Nearly 4 in the morning. Reality returned immediately. I sighed. I should go. Adrian looked at me carefully. Will you come back? It was a simple question. Yet something about the way he asked it made me realize this conversation was only the beginning. The drive home felt shorter than usual, probably because my mind never left the hospital. Dawn was beginning to color the horizon when I finally stepped into my apartment. The silence inside felt different now. For nearly a year, I had been living my ordinary life without realizing that somewhere across the city, a little boy had been depending on the same decision I made every month. I slept for 4 hours, went to work, and tried to convince myself that everything would return to normal. It did not. 3 days later, a delivery arrived at the laboratory. The receptionist called my name, and every head turned when 2 men carried in an enormous arrangement of white lilies. I immediately knew who had sent them. Tucked between the flowers was a simple card. Thank you. Ethan is smiling today. No signature was necessary. I sighed and carried the card home that evening. The next week another delivery appeared. This time it was a telescope. A very expensive telescope. I stared at it for almost 10 minutes before calling the number attached to the shipping invoice. A familiar voice answered on the second ring. You received it. It was not a question. Adrian. Naomi. Take it back. Silence. Then, Ethan wanted you to have it. I closed my eyes. That made the conversation harder. I cannot accept something like this. Why? Because helping a child is not a transaction. Another pause followed. I could almost hear him considering the answer. You truly expect nothing in return. Correct. His voice softened slightly. That is rare. The telescope disappeared the following day. I assumed that would be the end of it. Instead, a week later I received a photograph in the mail. Ethan stood beside a hospital window holding a paper crane and smiling directly at the camera. On the back he had written, "Thank you for being my friend." I kept that picture. Then another month passed. Donation day arrived again. This time when I entered the center, the nurses greeted me by name. One of them smiled knowingly. "Your little friend has been asking whether you are coming." I laughed despite myself. I guess I cannot disappoint him. The donation itself took less than an hour. Afterwards I headed toward the exit. Rain was falling again. Soft and steady. Through the glass doors I noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. The driver stepped out holding an umbrella. Before I could protest, he approached respectfully. "Mr. Sato asked me to make sure you arrived safely." I shook my head. "That is not necessary." "He expected you would say that." The driver handed me a folded note. I opened it immediately. The handwriting was precise. "Ethan has another appointment tomorrow. He asked if you might visit." For reasons I could not fully explain, I smiled. Then I looked down and noticed a second line written beneath the first. This one was clearly not from Ethan. It read, "I promise there will be no gifts this time." The next afternoon, I found myself walking through the familiar hospital corridor carrying a small box of colored pencils I had purchased on my lunch break. I told myself the visit was for Ethan. That was mostly true. The moment I entered his room, his face lit up in a way that erased every ounce of fatigue from my day. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He grinned and immediately showed me 3 new paper cranes hanging from a string near the window. One was blue. One was green. One was gold. "The gold one is lucky," he explained very seriously. "Good. We might need some extra luck." Ethan laughed. For the next hour we talked about planets, constellations, and whether astronauts got tired of eating the same food every day. It was surprisingly easy to forget the machines, the medications, and the reasons he was there in the first place. At some point, I noticed Adrian standing near the doorway. He had arrived without me realizing it. He did not interrupt. He simply watched his son laugh. The expression on his face was impossible to miss. It was not the look of a powerful man. It was the look of a father memorizing a happy moment. Later, after Ethan fell asleep, Adrian and I walked toward the hospital cafe. Outside the windows, clouds drifted across the Baltimore skyline. The afternoon sunlight painted everything gold. "You were right," he said unexpectedly. "About what?" "The gifts." I smiled. "That took you long enough." To my surprise, he laughed softly. "I am not used to people refusing things. You should try spending time with normal people." "And you believe you are normal?" I looked down at my coffee cup. "Compared to you?" "Absolutely." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked something that caught me completely off guard. "Why do you work so much?" I stared at him. "Excuse me. You leave the lab exhausted. You volunteer. You donate blood. You barely sleep." His gaze remained steady. Most people would have stopped months ago. I looked out the window. "Because somebody once helped my mother when they did not have to." The words came quietly. "And because I know what it feels like to need help and not know if it is coming." Adrian did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Ethan's mother believed the same thing." I turned toward him. It was the first time he had mentioned her since the night we met. Something distant entered his eyes. Something thoughtful. "She used to say kindness travels farther than money ever will." His fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup. I never understood what she meant until recently. Before I could answer, a man in a dark suit approached our table. He leaned down and quietly spoke into Adrian's ear. The change was immediate. Adrian's expression remained calm, but the warmth disappeared. The man handed him a folder. Adrian opened it, glanced at a single page, then closed it again. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When the man left, I looked at him carefully. "What happened?" Adrian forced a small smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." But for the first time since I had met him, I was absolutely certain he was lying. The lie stayed with me long after I left the hospital. Adrian had delivered it smoothly, calmly, the way someone accustomed to carrying responsibilities far heavier than most people could imagine might do. But I had seen the look in his eyes before it disappeared. Something was wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to focus on my normal routine. Work, sleep, grocery shopping, donation appointments, ordinary things. Yet every few days another message would arrive from Ethan. Sometimes it was a photograph of a newly folded paper crane. Sometimes it was a drawing of a planet with an impossible number of rings. Once he mailed me a handwritten list ranking every moon in the solar system from best to worst. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee across my kitchen table. Somehow, without noticing exactly when it happened, Ethan had become part of my life. Then one Thursday evening my phone rang. The caller identification displayed Mercy General. My heart immediately skipped. "Is Ethan okay?" I asked before the nurse could speak. "He is fine," she assured me. "Actually, he has been asking for you all day." Relief washed through me. An hour later I was walking through the familiar hospital corridor again. Ethan greeted me with an enormous grin and immediately launched into an explanation about a documentary he had watched about Mars. I listened carefully, asking questions, pretending not to notice how tired he looked. Children could hide exhaustion surprisingly well. Adults often forgot that. Eventually he lowered his voice. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." His fingers played with the corner of a paper crane. "Do you think my dad is lonely?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because he is always taking care of everyone else." I glanced toward the hallway. Adrian was nowhere in sight. "Your father loves you very much." "I know." Ethan smiled. "That was not my question." I laughed despite myself. "You are too smart for 7 years old." "That is what my teachers say." Then his smile faded slightly. "Sometimes he stays here all night when he thinks I am asleep." The image settled heavily in my chest. Suddenly I understood something important. The powerful man everyone seemed to fear was spending countless nights sitting beside a hospital bed, hoping his son would have another tomorrow. Later that evening, I found Adrian standing alone near the observation windows. The city lights stretched beneath us like a sea of stars. "Ethan thinks you need more hobbies," I said. Adrian looked genuinely confused. "More hobbies? Apparently worrying does not count." For a second he simply stared at me. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A real laugh. Brief but genuine. Changed his entire face. I suppose that sounds like him. The smile faded as quickly as it appeared. His phone vibrated. He checked the screen. The warmth vanished instantly. Not anger. Not fear. Something colder. More calculating. Before he could put the phone away, I caught a glimpse of the name displayed across the screen. Kenji Watanabe. Adrian noticed my expression. Slowly, he locked the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Who is Kenji?" I asked. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Whatever problem had been hiding in the shadows was no longer staying there. Adrian did not answer immediately. He looked back toward Ethan's room, where the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated the paper cranes hanging near the window. Only after several seconds did he speak. "Kenji and I have known each other for a very long time." His voice was calm, but something underneath it felt heavy. Long enough that I once trusted him completely. I folded my arms. "And now?" A faint smile crossed his face, though there was no humor in it. "Now I am not sure." Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated again. This time he ignored it. We stood quietly beside the glass, watching rain begin to fall over the city. Tiny droplets streaked across the windows, turning distant lights into blurred ribbons of gold. "You should go home," Adrian said eventually. "It is getting late." Normally I would have argued. Instead, something about his expression convinced me not to. The next evening, I left work shortly after sunset. The weather had changed dramatically. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and a steady rain soaked the streets. I stopped at a small grocery store near my apartment and spent 20 minutes wandering the aisles before heading back outside. That was when I noticed it. The same black sedan parked across the street. At first I assumed it was a coincidence. Then I saw the driver. The same man who had delivered notes from Adrian before. He stepped out holding a large white umbrella. "Miss Carter," he called politely. Mr. Sato asked me to drive you home. I blinked. Why? The driver hesitated. He thought it would be wise. That answer only made me more suspicious. Wise because of the weather? The driver glanced away for a fraction of a second. Something like that. My stomach tightened. Suddenly I remembered the phone call. Kenji Watanabe. The tension in Adrian's voice. The secret of conversations. The unexplained concern. None of it felt random anymore. I accepted the umbrella but declined the ride. Tell Adrian I can get home by myself. The driver looked uncomfortable. He will not like that answer. He does not have to like it. I started walking. The rain intensified almost immediately. Wind pushed water sideways across the sidewalk. Within minutes my coat was soaked. Then headlights appeared beside me. The black sedan again. The passenger window lowered. Adrian sat. Inside. You are incredibly stubborn. I laughed despite myself. That is rich coming from you. He shook his head and opened the door. Get in. I am 5 blocks from home. And I am trying to have one peaceful evening without worrying. The words surprised both of us. I could tell from the look on his face that he had not intended to say them aloud. For a moment neither of us moved. Rain hammered against the roof of the car. Finally I stepped inside. The warmth felt wonderful. Adrian looked out the windshield. There are people asking questions about you. Every trace of humor vanished from my expression. Why? Because someone discovered how important you are to Ethan. My heartbeat quickened. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. Then he looked directly at me. And I am not going to let anything happen to the woman who helped keep my son alive. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Rain streamed across the windshield while the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. I kept replaying Adrian's words in my mind. Important to Ethan. Until that moment, I had never considered myself important to anyone outside my small circle of coworkers and friends. Yet somehow, through a series of choices I had made without expecting recognition, I had become part of a little boy's world. When the car stopped outside my apartment building, neither of us immediately reached for the door. The engine hummed softly. Rain tapped against the roof. Finally, I turned toward him. You cannot protect people from everything. Adrian looked out the windshield for a moment. I know. Then why try? His answer came so quietly I almost missed it. Because sometimes trying is all you have left. The honesty in those words stayed with me long after I climbed the stairs to my apartment. The following week brought a new challenge. Ethan's doctors had scheduled an important evaluation. If the results were favorable, he could finally move forward toward a procedure that might reduce his dependence on constant transfusions. The entire hospital seemed cautiously hopeful. When I arrived that morning, Ethan was sitting upright in bed holding a stack of paper cranes. I made 23, he announced proudly. Why 23? I asked. Because 24 felt unlucky. I laughed. That is very scientific. I know. His grin widened. Despite the jokes, I could see the nervousness behind his smile. Children always knew more than adults realized. Later that afternoon, while Ethan underwent testing, Adrian and I waited in a quiet family lounge overlooking the harbor. Neither of us spoke much. The ticking clock seemed unusually loud. Every passing minute stretched longer than the last. For the first time since meeting him, I saw uncertainty in Adrian's eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for his son. Then the door opened. Dr. Helen Brooks entered carrying a folder. Her expression gave nothing away. My heart immediately started racing. Adrian stood. Doctor. She looked at both of us before finally smiling. Relief flooded the room so quickly it almost felt physical. The results are encouraging, she said. Very encouraging. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, just for a second. But in that second, I witnessed months of worry lifting from his shoulders. Ethan's future was still uncertain. There would still be treatments, still be challenges. But for the first time there was genuine hope. Later that evening we found Ethan asleep beneath a blanket of paper cranes. Golden sunset light poured through the hospital window. Adrian stood beside the bed, watching his son breathe peacefully. You know, I said softly. He thinks you are a hero. Adrian shook his head. No. His gaze never left Ethan. I think he already found one. Before I could respond, Ethan stirred slightly in his sleep and smiled. The room fell quiet again. Looking at him, I finally understood something. Sometimes the most important choices are the ones nobody notices. A donation, a visit, a promise to show up. Small acts that seem ordinary in the moment, yet somehow change an entire life. Or maybe several.